Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Joe Olson. I do communications here at Fresh Energy, and I'm joined today by a few folks from the team. Welcome to Michael Noble, Fresh Energy's Executive Director, Justin Fay, Lead Director of Public Affairs, and Anna Johnson, Senior Associate of Public Affairs. Hello to the three of you.
Hey,
Hi
Joe.
there. Hi,
Hey,
Joe.
Joe.
Thanks for joining. So, we're here today because we are in the final month of the 2021 session of the Minnesota Legislature, and there is a lot happening for clean energy, not to mention federal movement around the White House's American Jobs Plan. But before we start talking about clean energy, I want us first to talk about other priorities for the Minnesota Legislature. Michael, can you take this?
Well, Joe, first things first, Fresh Energy really strongly encourages the legislature to take immediate action to address the systemic, structural, and institutional racism of our systems, policing and justice, public safety. This is completely unfinished business, and there's obviously a pressing need, as evidenced by the most recent death of Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. No person should ever fear for their lives when being stopped for a traffic stop or any interaction with police. So these kinds of events that traumatize our community and traumatize our Black and Brown colleagues, these absolutely cannot continue. And there is pending legislation that would take meaningful action. So we want the House and the Senate to cooperate and make meaningful progress on this immediately.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think it's really important to note right off the bat. I'll also add that Fresh Energy is actively working at the legislature to ensure clean energy can play a role in community recovery, which I think we'll be talking about a little bit further along in the podcast.
Yes, thank you both. So I think it's really important to recognize that before we talk about anything else. So thanks for taking a moment there. Now, to circle back, our plan is to take the next 45 minutes or so to discuss how Fresh Energy is working collaboratively across political boundaries to find common ground on clean energy. At the end of this podcast, we'll also dig into a few of the features of the American Jobs Plan that we're especially excited about. But now, I believe that there are several meaningful steps that we believe legislators can take yet this session. So first off, let's talk about the Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, also known, thank goodness, as the ECO Act. Much easier to say. Justin, do you want to kick us off here?
I'd love to, Joe. And we have some exciting breaking news as of the recording of this podcast on the ECO Act. I think folks listening, and I want to add my welcome to all of the Fresh Energy supporters listening to this. It's great to have such a wonderful community of folks engaged on these really critical issues. And those of you that have been following Fresh Energy for a long time know that energy efficiency is a longtime priority of Fresh Energy. The cheapest energy there is the energy we never use, and that is encapsulated at the state by our landmark conservation improvement program, which is our Minnesota's energy efficiency law. And for the last couple of years, Fresh Energy has been part of a coalition along with our friends at the Center for Energy and Environment. Every major utility in the state of Minnesota, all of our investor-owned utilities and the associations representing rural electric co-ops and municipal utilities, a number of clean energy businesses and other business community leaders and other clean energy and environmental organizations that are all working together on a piece of legislation called the Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, or ECO Act, as you said, Joe. And we had two significant steps just this past week. On April 12th, the Minnesota House passed the ECO Act off the floor. It was the first floor action of the session on that bill, and we were really pleased to see that step forward, and really encouraged by the strong bipartisan vote. 12 Republicans and every Democrat voting together to send a signal that, yeah, we need to follow where the market is going and where industry is leading, and have a regulatory framework for efficiency that matches. And just on Wednesday, that would be the 14th of April, the Minnesota Senate had a debate over ECO in the context of its omnibus energy bill, which was on the floor. They did not vote on the ECO Act yet, but Majority Leader Gazelka did commit in public on the floor of the Minnesota Senate that there would be a vote in the Senate on the ECO Act in 2021, and that he thought it would pass. So that was a really, really big step forward. We're encouraged to see that, and hope the Senate will join the House in taking that action. And in addition to moving us forward on efficiency, really send the signal that collaborative stakeholder work involving sectors like the utilities and business and nonprofit advocates working together is valued and appreciated, and will result in steps forward. And Michael, it really is a critical policy, and something that I know you've personally been involved in quite a bit the last couple of years. You want to maybe catch our folks up and just remind them why this bill is so important?
Sure, Justin. The utility energy conservation and energy efficiency investment programs is near and dear to Fresh Energy's heart, because we worked on this policy 30 years ago when it was first enacted in 1991. And believe it or not, in 30 years, it only had one major policy update, bringing it up modern in 2007. And now in 2021, we expect it to be modernized again. The basic logic is the same, is that when utilities invest in energy conservation, that's good for consumers, it's good for the utility, it's good for the grid, it's good for the environment, it's good for businesses, it's good for families. As you said earlier, the cheapest energy is the energy we never have to purchase. But this ECO Act, when I say modernizes, it's going to let utilities save energy elsewhere in the economy. Let the utilities save energy over in transportation, or let the gas utility save energy in the electric grid, or let the electric utility save energy over in the gas grid. So we're basically saying all hands on deck. There's energy to be saved everywhere you turn. My favorite example, and I gave this back in 1995, is the lowly exit lamp used to have two 40-watt light bulbs. And we advocated in 1990 that it should have two 15-watt complex fluorescents. But today it has two 1-watt LEDs. So there's over a 95% reduction in the energy use in exit lamps, and nobody is complaining that exit lamps ain't what they used to be. So I think it's a pretty good example that there's energy efficiency savings everywhere in the economy, and this bill unleashes our utilities. Go find them.
I like that anecdote a lot. I haven't heard that one before, and I will definitely be using it. Thank you both. It sounds like there is just so much to be excited about in the ECO Act. So let's move on to another bipartisan initiative, the Natural Gas Innovation Act. Now, I think it's easy to say that this is like a really complicated piece of legislation. Justin, can you give us a really high-level primer to get us started on the conversation?
Sure, I will do my best. It is a really complex and but important piece of legislation, and I think the name of it might raise some questions right off the bat, right? Like why would a group like Fresh Energy be working on something that's called the Natural Gas Innovation Act? It seems a little bit off-brand, right? The reality is, what studies have consistently shown, including most recently the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's annual greenhouse gas inventory, that the building sector, and in particular residential buildings and smaller commercial buildings, is the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota. Period, full stop. And left unchecked, that has the potential to undermine all of the progress we're making in other sectors. We're driving down emissions successfully and have been for years in the electricity sector, but it doesn't mean anything if the net carbon emissions just keep increasing somewhere else. And so we have got to bend the curve, and we've got to do it urgently and immediately. And that means really digging in and having hard conversations about what does it mean to decarbonize a gas utility. And I want to give the folks at CenterPoint Energy some credit. They are moving a piece of legislation that takes some first steps in that direction. And it's important that those of us who are so committed to taking meaningful climate action engage with that conversation and try to make sure that we take some successful first steps, demonstrate that we can do this, that we do have strategies that work for meeting end uses in ways that are less carbon intensive. And it's a really unique opportunity that we think it would be a mistake to miss. And the branding of the bill aside, what it actually does is it creates a regulatory framework for state regulators and utilities and other stakeholders to explore what is the decision-making process going to be for alternative resources to fossil gas. And one example of that that's gotten a lot of airplay and a lot of attention in this bill and elsewhere is renewable natural gas, which we think has some potential and some limitations as a fuel source. But it also includes electrification and efficiency. And Michael just gave a full-throated articulation of why efficiency is so important. This is another place where that pops up. And having robust tools in the toolbox for the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, for our gas utilities, and for organizations like Fresh Energy and other stakeholders like the business community to be able to deploy and access and use and plan for is a game changer, and that's the opportunity here. We're really excited about what the long-term potential is. I think the Natural Gas Innovation Act is not as far along in the process as the bill we were just talking about, the ECO Act, but it has passed out of its committees in both the House and the Senate. It is similar but different between the two bodies, and I think long-term one goal that we have, or important perspective that we think needs to be included in a final bill, is a really long-term perspective and framework for not just how are we going to start, but how are we going to think about gas utility decarbonization over years and decades, not just in the next few months at the commission. And so Anna, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about sort of how that's showing up in the bill.
Yeah,
might be interested.
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think that was a great kind of description of what the bill is and where we're at and why it's needed. And something I'm really excited about that's specifically in the bill is that it directs the Public Utilities Commission to open a docket, so a formal on-the-record conversation about what is the future of a fossil gas utility in a decarbonized world. And this is a great opportunity for, like you said, regulators, stakeholders, utilities to weigh in and think through the first steps pretty much of where we're going to go down the line, because we know where we need to go. So thinking through how this is going to get there in a public forum where the public will be invited. So I'm pretty excited about that. And that's something that Fresh Energy has been thinking about and talking about with other stakeholders around the country. So I'm excited that it'll be happening hopefully here in Minnesota in a Minnesota specific context.
Thank you both. That is just a really complex issue, and I know that there's a lot more to come in that space. So for now, let's move on to talk about further strategies for building decarbonization, as we kind of touched on here. And Justin, as you said, prior to repeat what you said, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has released the state's latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and the report found that buildings, residential and commercial, are the fastest growing source of emissions in Minnesota. Michael, what can we do about this?
So the energy code, the Minnesota Building Energy Code, is kind of a bedrock public policy for making sure that new construction is as efficient as it can be. And Fresh Energy's worked on the energy code its entire 30-year history. But this piece of legislation going through the legislature right now shows real momentum and real progress and real possibility of becoming law in 2021. Essentially, improving the way energy codes are done for the commercial buildings. Now, I'll admit that residential energy codes are about 90% of the teeth gnashing and political problems, but the commercial energy code has been usually agreeable, and progress is readily made. And this piece of legislation is going to speed up progress, raise ambition, and make the commercial energy code making much more systematic and prompt. As the technology evolves, the code is going to keep up. And the sleeper news is that commercial buildings will be carbon free in about 15 years if this comes law.
And
All commercial buildings, all new construction commercial buildings would be carbon free in about 15 years.
it's another game changer, and I think a lot of credit is due to the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, which is a state agency that maybe doesn't get a lot of airplay in the energy realm, but is a really plays a number of really important functions. And in this instance, they're go by DOLI is the acronym. We'll try to avoid acronyms in this conversation, though. The labor and industry is responsible for the building code in Minnesota, and have to give the staff there, as well as their colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, a lot of credit for really digging in over the past 18 months or so, and facilitating a lot of robust dialogue back and forth between the stakeholders here, folks in the clean energy community, and labor unions and business. And that's it's really hard work, that stakeholder, those stakeholder conversations, when folks have a lot of maybe not opposed, but just are prioritizing the work differently and outcomes differently. How do you thread that needle? And it doesn't get a lot of attention. It's not big splashy work that ends up above the fold in the Star Tribune. But in this instance, it's resulted in a really thoughtful, frankly, consensus policy position that's moving at the legislature. And through 4 hearings, has had nobody testify in opposition, which is great.
Well, it's above the fold here at Fresh Energy, which is why we're talking about it today. So lots to do there, just tons of progress to be made, and as it's happening. So as we alluded to when we kicked off this podcast, Fresh Energy is also, among all the other things that we're doing, working to ensure that clean energy can play a role in community recovery. Anna, can you talk a little bit about the Rebuild Right grant program and what exactly it entails?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So as we are all well aware of, in the end of May, early June, when we were all suffering from the health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially our BIPOC neighbors and communities disproportionately suffering from that. Communities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and just across the state and country and world, as we saw, suffered the additional trauma and distress from the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police, and everything that unfolded in the wake of that horrific moment. And in Minneapolis and St. Paul and elsewhere, there's some civil unrest, and a lot of small businesses and some multifamily residential buildings and some public property, homes were damaged as a result. And in terms of businesses, a huge percentage of them were owned by BIPOC folks or immigrants. So, and a lot of these businesses were already suffering from lower income from the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's a lot of destruction. And sort of limited resources available to rebuild after those events. So Fresh Energy has been working on a bill called Rebuild Right that would provide tools to rebuild in a way in those areas that were hit really hard to reduce utility bills, improve public health outcomes, and create jobs and long-term economic development in the wake of that damage. The bill includes funds to allow energy efficiency improvements and other energy improvements to those buildings that are being rebuilt. And this is really important because funds were already limited. So this provides an additional sort of resource to make sure that places are being rebuilt above the baseline. We're talking about building codes above the baseline floor. We're rebuilding them in a way that is beneficial to the building owners and to the businesses long term.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, definitely.
And-
Sorry. And as of now, the bill's included in Representative Long's energy omnibus bill, and we're hoping that there can be some bipartisan agreement through the end of the session.
Excellent, thank you. So let's pivot to talk about 100% carbon-free electricity. I know this is a top priority for Fresh Energy. Justin, do you want to take a first swing at this?
Yeah, well, I right off the bat, this really has been a top priority for Fresh Energy for a number of years now. Minnesota was once upon a time a national leader when we adopted the renewable energy standard back in 2007 that said we were going to 25% of our electricity from renewables by 2025, and Excel would go even faster than that. It worked. It was every utility has met their goal, and it's been a net boon to Minnesota's economy, and it's been a wild success story that's been emulated and now surpassed throughout the country. And the question in front of the state, in front of our legislature and our governor and our state agencies and energy stakeholders is what's next. This is how it works, right? You set goals, you reach them, and then you set new goals. And our advocacy has been really focused the last couple of years on how do we build on the record of success that we have, continue cleaning up the grid, and send the market signal to the industry, to our utilities, that this is going to be a great place to do business for clean energy, that we're going to have a political and regulatory environment that works for those businesses and folks who want to make those investments in Minnesota. And so that's really what this issue is all about. I want to give a lot of credit to two folks in particular that have been real leaders alongside Fresh Energy and driving this conversation forward. First, of course, is Governor Tim Walz, who for the second budget cycle in a row included 100% carbon-free electricity standard as part of his signature clean energy package called the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy. And the second is the 100% campaign, of which Fresh Energy is a member. Michael participates in the steering committee of that, and particularly want to shout out a good friend of Fresh Energy, Chris Conry, who's the campaign manager for that effort, and has done a terrific job building a coalition of a really broad-based set of stakeholders that includes a lot of folks that have traditionally not been included in energy conversations. And I think that's been a really important step forward, not just on the policy front, but in terms of how we as an advocacy community engage with this issue and think about how these decisions are made and how policies are written. Michael, do you want to tell us a little bit about the particulars of this year's proposal and why it's just, gosh, so much better than even where we were a couple of years ago?
Yeah, this is kind of a flagship issue for Fresh Energy. As you mentioned, we have a big community of allies in business and labor and advocacy and equity and justice groups who are all aligned behind 100% clean electricity, carbon-free electricity supply. And I'm glad you gave a shout out to the governor and to our chief author in the House of Representatives, Chair Jamie Long, and ranking member on the Energy Committee in the Senate, Senator Nick Frentz of Mankato. But this this subject is moving. I don't know if it's going to be getting to the governor's desk to become law in 2021, but the debate is moving. The debate is evolving. The utilities know this is where it's headed. The utilities know this is inevitable and required and necessary, and the way the world actually is now. So it's just a question of how and when, at what pace. And I want to credit all of those political leaders who I just named by coming together and first of all, moving the goalpost up from 2050 carbon-free electric supply to 2040. And even more important in my mind is creating a benchmark hurdle that you had to clear by 2030. It's a lot more important what we accomplish in the next 5 years or the next 7 years or next 9 years than it is what we accomplish out 30 years from now. So they both moved up the deadline, and they put in an 80% by 2030 benchmark. This is a technology neutral policy, so this could allow wind and solar and batteries and hydro and existing nuclear power or other carbon-free supply. And the important thing is that it's driving the debate, not just here in Minnesota, but everywhere in America. And I think a little later in the program, we're going to talk about the national 100% carbon-free standard being debated in the United States Congress.
Well, that's just great, Michael. And I just wanted to jump in here for folks listening at home, since you smartly name dropped the great leaders that we have at the legislature, Chair Long and Representative Frentz. I just
Senator
wanted to
Frentz.
take Senator Frentz. Sorry, Senator. I did not mean to demote you.
I knew I had to intervene there, Justin.
Joe's gonna get some work with that bleep button later. Those are fighting words. Wanted to just remind listeners that we actually were fortunate to have Chair Long and Senator Frentz as guests on this podcast earlier this session. If you look in your whichever app you might be using to listen to this podcast back in January, we had a conversation with those two folks, and they talked at some length about their work on the 100% clean carbon-free standard and sort of their long-term goals and strategies. And it's definitely worth, even though we're now towards the end of the session, it's definitely worth going back and giving that a listen.
And geez, talk about two gentlemen who have like great banter between them. That was a really fun podcast to record, and I'm glad that you boosted it because I think it's still a really important topic. So now I want to move on to something that I feel like we've been talking about for years. And Justin, we actually have Clean Cars Minnesota. MPCA is in the midst of their rulemaking process, which the governor ordered way back in 2019, which was delayed due to COVID-19. Thousands and thousands of Minnesotans participated in the rulemaking process. In fact, just to toot our own horn, about 745 used our platform to comment on the rulemaking process. However, there are discussions about Clean Cars Minnesota and the role of the MPCA surfacing at the Minnesota Legislature for the second year in a row. What is up and why are they meddling? Justin.
What politicians meddling? That doesn't sound right, Joe. No, I appreciate the question, and just at the outset, it would be hard to oversell just how long we've been working on this. Clean Cars Minnesota as a branded proposal is a couple of years old. But fun little fresh energy trivia. The first time I ever got to work collaboratively on something with Michael was Clean Cars legislation. And that was way back in, well, we won't say the year. I will just say it was not the current decade or the previous decade. It was longer ago than that. This has been a subject of conversation in state government in Minnesota for a very long time because it is just the right thing to do, but it is complicated and has a tendency to get interwoven with a lot of other what I would call tangentially related political considerations around various choices that policymakers have for fueling and powering transportation, for how within the state how a policy like this is implemented from the perspective of dealers and manufacturers and consumers. We've talked about it on the podcast before. Clean Cars Minnesota was announced as a proposal by Governor Walz in September of 2019. And since then, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which is by federal law the designated lead for Minnesota agency under the Clean Air Act, has been engaged in a public rulemaking process that has featured a significant number of public meetings, 2 separate, very robust public comment periods that thousands of Minnesotans have participated in both cases. And we're nearing the end of that process. And anytime you have a multi-year effort that starts getting close to a successful outcome, folks come out of the woodwork and you become a target. And that really is what's happening here. The context and the broader context for what's happening in Minnesota is a sea change that's happening throughout America and throughout the auto industry, where we have companies like General Motors, committing dozens of new EV models that they're going to be rolling off the assembly line in the next 3 to 5 years. Major commitments from states and other countries around, very, very aggressive sector-wide decarbonization in the coming decades. And it's just become very obvious what direction this is going. And what you see at the legislature when, we'll use your word, meddling begins to happen, is that really isn't anything more than the dying throes of the petroleum industry, to be candid. And I think we should expect that will continue, that there are a lot of entrenched interests that are threatened by a state like Minnesota, a Midwestern state, a cold climate state, taking an action like this. And it is that much more important that supporters of climate action, of clean transportation, of pollution and public health and public health equity really dig in and pull this across the finish line. And that includes sending a message to folks in the Minnesota Legislature that the Pollution Control Agency needs to do its job. Joe, you've been a great leader at Fresh Energy in helping us think about how we do our advocacy better. And there's actually a new tool that we have that we're going to be rolling out probably before you've listened to this podcast, for those of you listening at home. And it's a new platform for engaging digitally with your lawmakers on the Fresh Energy website. And from time to time in your email boxes, you'll get opportunities to take action and send messages directly to your state senator, state house rep, and sometimes the governor on matters of critical importance for energy and climate. And the first one of those is going live on our website on Clean Cars Minnesota, and making sure that folks, particularly in the legislature, hear from folks like Fresh Energy members that this is important, that the legislature needs to allow our scientists and experts to do their job. And encourage you folks listening at home, visit the Fresh Energy website. That's fresh-energy.org. And right there on our blog, you'll see a session update newsletter with a link to the Take Action opportunity. I encourage you all to click through when you hear this.
Thank you, Justin. We could use all the shameless plugs we can for that tool, because I think it's a really great entry point for people to connect with their legislators on clean energy. And what's wonderful is we have to have a tool like this because more and more people want to talk about clean energy, clean cars, things like that. And I'm really happy that Fresh Energy can be here to help people do that.
Joe,
Yeah.
Joe, just to make sure, did I get the website right? It's fresh. What was it again?
I think there's a dash. So it's
fresh-energy.org. Okay.
fresh-energy.org. And if you want a shortcut to the take action section, where we actually have a couple opportunities in addition to clean cars, but you should prioritize clean cars, it's fresh-energy.org/take-action. So it's always there. There's always new stuff posted, as well as tips to kind of decarbonize your home as well. So I know all of you and many Fresh Energy staff members have been running nonstop to Zoom committee meetings to provide oral and written testimony literally dozens of times this session. We've been advocating for many bills that are good for clean energy and even beyond, like what we discussed today. We can't talk about them all just because there's not enough time. But there's also been hundreds of hours dedicated to defense on bills that would move Minnesota backwards, something we just really can't afford. Before we close the podcast, though, I want to zoom out of Minnesota and talk about what the three of you are most excited about in the White House's American Jobs Plan. So I'm going to jump in here first. Actually, I'm cutting the line. And I want to say we're all really big cheerleaders for the Clean Electricity Standard. And in fact, we hosted a webinar last week with Senator Tina Smith. It's up on the website. She was joined by Paul Douglas and some other Fresh Energy guests to discuss that very issue, the Clean Electricity Standard. Michael, do you want to start the conversation by talking about what CES is, and then we can go from there with other things that folks are excited about?
Well, for me, the thrilling thing is that President Biden has put a clean electricity standard in his infrastructure bill. Again, he calls it the American Jobs Plan, but in all candor, this is the infrastructure bill, this is the energy bill, this is the transportation bill, this is the climate bill. You know, it's possible they'll break these into two bills or two discussions, but for now, when you hear the phrase America Jobs Plan, think climate, think energy, think transportation, think infrastructure. And I love how the administration is laying out the argument that the infrastructure of 1950s maybe was the interstate highway system, but the infrastructure of the 2020s and the 2030s and the 2040s is including the electric grid, including broadband, including how we care for an aging population, including telecommunications. And I really believe that the president and the folks who work for him understand that a carbon-free American electric grid is the backbone of our economic future. And I'm just flattered and delighted and thrilled that United States Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota is the chief author of that provision, and that it's part of the president's bill. So we've already talked about this at some length on this podcast. It's essentially the exact same policy that we're advancing, except for President Biden is calling for 100% carbon-free electricity supply by 2035, and again, 80% carbon-free electric supply by 2030. And again, that's not just in these, the green and windy states of green in California or New York and windy in Kansas, but this is 100% carbon-free everywhere in America, including, Alaska and Oklahoma and Alabama and Tennessee and South Carolina. So, and West Virginia, where U.S. Senator Joe Manchin is chair of the Energy Committee. So there's a lot of negotiations, and I know the president wants this to be a bipartisan vote if there's a possibility of 10 United States senators that would come along. But I think he's also signaled really clearly that that's not going to stop him from making progress if they have to do it through budget reconciliation, as they did with the American Rescue Plan. So a long way of saying the biggest climate and energy bill in my life is now being debated in the United States Congress, and I'm thrilled about it. So lots of amazing things in the bill, and I guess we'll have a blog post coming up in the next few days just to outline some of Fresh Energy's favorite provisions.
Thank you, Michael. Justin, do you have any thoughts or anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I think Michael hit an awful lot of high points. It's hard to take a lot of issue with the importance of the everything that he talked about. But I'll add one thing, which is, I think as we think about more broadly about economic recovery and where the opportunities and needs might be in Minnesota, and in particular communities in Minnesota, such as community, our BIPOC communities, under-resourced communities around the state, communities recovering from, the killing of George Floyd and civil unrest from last summer, spring and summer, rural communities that are struggling with job loss. I think there is a unique, perhaps once in a generation opportunity here to leverage an influx of resources and use it really carefully and strategically to address some of those just like chronic and systemic disparities that we see throughout our state, and hopefully supercharge some of the work that we've already been starting and trying to do here in Minnesota. Anna talked earlier about the Rebuild Right proposal. I think that's, we're really proud of that, but that is it's pretty modest of a proposal when you compare it against the scope of, the economic reality of what a lot of folks in these communities are facing. And the federal government has the wherewithal and the resources to really address those problems. And what what I'm hopeful for is that this is a moment in time where the political capital and resources finally match the financial and legal resources. And encouraged by what I've seen so far from the Biden administration, and I'm hopeful that we can, that can turn into real results for folks.
Yeah, I think I'll build off of that, Justin. When we look back at past huge investments in infrastructure from the federal government, we know that not only did they, in the case of excluding people and President Roosevelt's New Deal, BIPOC folks were left out of opportunities for all of the thousands and thousands of jobs that were created through that program. But, in the case of Eisenhower's highway expansions, there was really active harm to a lot of communities, and specifically Black communities were targeted in citing highways and taking a lot of wealth away from Black communities, homeowners, business owners. So I'm hoping and expecting that the federal government's going to do much better this time, and I appreciate that the Biden plan has a requirement that 40% of funds be spent in under-resourced communities, and I hope and expect that there will be a lot of scrutiny and accountability around that goal, and making sure that that's seen through.
So well put. Thank you, Anna. And I just love the use of the word expect. That just feels right, especially at this moment. Michael, I know you have some thoughts about Biden's team. Do you want to talk a little bit about who he's called up to bat, or whatever appropriate sports analogy works here?
Yeah, if it was a baseball game, you'd want to have a program to tell all the players, and there's a lot of incredible players on the field. And I'm just going to avoid dropping names because there's just too many people that Fresh Energy knows well, that know Fresh Energy, that we know are passionate about equity and justice and standards and decarbonization. Really, really deeply talented, brilliant people who may not be on your radar screen. But the highest level folks, like John Kerry on international negotiations, and Governor Granholm at the Department of Energy, and Pete Buttigieg at transportation, and Gina McCarthy in the White House. Those names are a lot of those are household names, but there's really, really a deep bench all the way down, dozens of amazing, talented people. And if I just get to call out one amazingly talented people, a friend of Fresh Energy for almost 30 years is Cecilia Martinez, and she's a top player in the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and really is a very influential voice in the Biden administration for energy justice, environmental justice, and truly deeply represents the constituencies that have been left behind, authentically and truly deeply represents these voices her entire professional life. And her little nonprofit that she started, the Center for Earth, Energy and Democracy, as the Minneapolis address, and everybody who lives in Minnesota should be proud to see her elevated by President Biden to lead on environmental justice.
So to keep with the sports analogy, if we were to like make promotional t-shirts or jerseys, they'd all say Martinez on the back because we're her biggest fans. All right, lots to digest here. Probably a lot more to come at both the federal and the state levels in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned to Fresh Energy's website. Thank you to the three of you, Michael, Justin, and Anna, for giving our listeners some insight into what's happening at the legislature and also at the federal level. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
It was
Thank you,
fun.
Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Michael and Justin. It was fun to chat.
I love doing it. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you everyone listening for joining us. If you're hungry for more or want to get involved, visit that website that we've been saying so much, fresh-energy.org. There you can tune in to the webinar we mentioned with Senator Tina Smith. You can also send an email to your legislators about Clean Cars Minnesota. You can also register for upcoming events, and I tell you, we've got a lot. There's also a whole bunch more you can do on the website, so I highly recommend that you visit it. I'd also like to remind you that you can also support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation there. Surprise, again, it's all on the website. Just click donate in the upper right corner of your screen when you go there. Thank you for listening. And before we close, I just want to say that we are all, the whole Fresh Energy team, everyone here in Minnesota and around the country, we're anxiously awaiting the outcome and unfolding of really, really important moments in 2021, moments of change and restoration and hope. We're hopeful. Fresh Energy stands with you as we all envision a better world.